The whole point of reading and writing in our existence is so we can relate and communicate with each other. However, despite everyone learning these basics, there are some people who are better at communicating than others, and that seems to be a fact. And why is that? Stick around for this one. Okay, so today we have here all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, a good friend of mine, Excites. How are you doing?
I am really good. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. How's Charlotte? How's Charlotte this morning?
Charlotte is good. So, winter in Charlotte is pretty mild. We haven't seen any snow this year. So it's been pretty calm, pretty warm. It's been a good season here in Charlotte.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you give us a brief bio about yourself for those who don't know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Meg Seitz. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I own a company called Toth Shop, T-O-T-H Shop, and we are a communications agency. And our specialty is humanizing communication, which means across marketing, PR, content creation, even foundational brand development for companies, businesses, and personal brands. I'm really concerned, and our team is really concerned with humanizing the messaging. So how do we warm it up? How do we make it feel like it is written for humans, by humans? So we tend to work a lot hand in hand with the analytics and the data and the SEO folks to really tell the human interest side of business and storytelling and marketing. My background is that I went to undergraduate college. I went to Kenyon College and I majored in English. So as you can imagine, I specialized in literature and writing. And then I ended up, my first job out of college is I taught high school. So final year of high school here is 12th grade. I taught 12th grade English, specifically world literature. And so I taught for a number of years and then got into branding for a company called Lululemon, which is athletic apparel, and really combined both ideas of education and reading and writing and thinking with brand strategy. And right after I graduated from business school, I started Toth Shop, all with the idea of creating a place where businesses and brands could be both human and creative and thinkers in their businesses, but then also they could sell and market. So they were equal parts artistry and business. So now we work with clients all over the world to bring both artistry and business to a lot of their thinking, writing, and marketing.
Right. Most of the time,
we wait, time out. We know each other because of the Peter Drucker Challenge.
Exactly, yeah.
The ultimate human experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is communication so important? You'd hear in in corporate structures, you'd see brands and communications, you see head of communication, so on and so forth. Why is it such an integral part of corporate institutions these days? And why should it?
Why should it be? Yeah, I think communications has always been an important part of the way we do business because it's ultimately, to a certain extent, it's obviously how we communicate one thing to another, but it's also how we form connections with each other. It's how we form connections with, people to people or people to products or people to services. Like it's really the ultimate way to form the initial connection, but then to form relationships. And I think that's really the crux of it is how do we use communication to spark connections and build relationships? And that's really, in this world we can do business with relationships or transactions, most likely both. But my stance is that we do better business when we do it with a relationship-based approach, which I think starts with how, when, and why we communicate.
Right. So I absolutely agree with you. Why do you think others like you are better at it than other people?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. I feel like it is my world. I think I trained my ear really early on, and I think this was part of my studies in English and literature, is that you learn to train your ear really early on to figure out
what does that mean? Sorry, what does that mean?
Yeah, like you listen differently, right? Like even when you're reading something, you're listening because you're reading something and there's obviously the message. But part of English, part of studying English and communications is reading what is written or hearing what is said, but also taking a second to like think about what's underlying, like what's the real message, what's not being said or read, what's the underlying message. And I think I learned really early on in college and as a writer to listen to what is said and unsaid. And so I think that's one thing that has refined my approach to communication, is that I'm constantly talking to people and also trying to figure out the multiple layers that they're communicating, right? Like they're saying things, but then there's also, a couple of backstories to what they're saying as well.
Yeah, so I'm listening to what you're saying. Is it the same as if am I a better communicator if I am more articulate or more eloquent? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I honestly think that the best communication is the simplest too. Like I feel like sometimes people think like, oh, to be a good communicator, I have to use like the biggest word or the most eloquent word. And I think to be a really good communicator, you just have to say what you mean in language that is true for you. So if you're in a conversation with somebody and they're using words that's like, you would never say that, you're creating a barrier in your communication. So as a communicator, which I think everybody is a communicator, whether they do it, whether it's in their job title or not, like your responsibility as a communicator is to communicate as honestly and as authentically as you can for you. A lot of times we will, fluff it up or add in words or phrases that are, kind of a cushion, when in reality we'd get a lot farther if we just said what we mean.
Right. So, how important is storytelling in all of this? Because I see that I've seen a couple of things you've written in the past, and there's a lot of storytelling to it, and it's beautiful how it's like crafted. What's the thought process towards that, like in bringing out pieces like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love storytelling because I think at the end, it's one of the first ways we learn language, right? Like we learn through stories as young kids. Even as we're shaping language, we're often read books or stories. And so I think it's our entry point to communication, is creating and writing and telling stories that will allow somebody else to I want to say access, but I think what I really mean is like, again, another connection point. Like there are many times that we tell stories or we hear stories and it's like, I can relate to that, or I had a similar experience in my life. So I think, to the point earlier about sparking connections, I think you have the choice to tell somebody something or to show them. And oftentimes we show them in stories. And I think for learning purposes, we're much more likely to get somebody on board with our ideas or our communication when we tell them in a story.
All right. You work in the school setting, right? So how should people be telling their stories so that their personal stories, so that they can, access the education that's available to them? How should they be telling? Because they ask for personal statement. That's quite a headache for most people.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like the worst question. Be honest. The most frustrating or fear-inducing question is like, tell me about yourself.
Exactly.
Like, I hate everybody. That question is horrible. There's no way around it though. So I have been teaching for a number of years. Obviously, I started teaching at high school level, the teenager level, and recently I've been teaching undergraduates. And one of the things that I have taught in the past at the undergraduate level is career, really, I guess, career coaching, but preparing young people for their careers. And inevitably, what I'm always saying is you have to have an answer to the question of, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Right.
And that people always panic. And what's really funny to me is in those moments when somebody says, tell me about yourself, a lot of times they forget to say their name, which is like, in that moment of panic, you're like, your brain is firing through this, like, oh my gosh, do I talk about school? Do I talk about work? Do I talk about where I'm from or family? You're worried about all this editing that you're doing in your head that you forget the anchor statement, right? Which is always like the first place you go, your first North Star is to say your name.
Wow. That's so true. That's very true.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you the number of times that I have been, with students and I'm like, introduce yourself. And they're like, well, I'm a science major and I'm from, New York or whatever. And I'm like, well, what's your name? Who are you? So that's my first piece of advice is, as a grounding piece, always make sure to say your name. First and foremost, your name. But also, when you say your name, you're also signaling to the other person how to pronounce your name. Which, if you have a name that anyone, with my last name can be said a couple different ways depending on where you are in the world.
Right.
But you're also telling them how to say your name too, or what you like to be called. So I would start it with your name. And then the next piece I like to tell people is where they are in life. So if you're a student, say, I am a student studying something at this university. If you're working, I would do the exact same thing. I would say, I am currently working as, and then your job title, and then the company that you work for.
Right.
And then I might also, whether you're a student or you're a working professional, this next phrase is kind of player's choice. So I would probably have a sentence or two about what your daily life is like. So if you're a student, what kinds of classes do you take? What are you interested in? Or maybe what are you hoping, what kind of job are you looking for? Like, I study science because I'm hoping to go to medical school and become a pediatrician. Right. Or, I'm working in communications. So my day-to-day life often involves speaking with marketing and communications professionals around the world.
Right.
And then what I always try to coach people to do too is end with like a connection point, right? So end with maybe something about your family, where you're from, maybe even sports you played, teams that you're interested in. Like, think about ending your introduction with something that's going to keep the conversation going. Because a lot of times, as an example, I'm just using the science example right now, so I'll follow this thread. A lot of times if somebody's telling me they're studying science to become a doctor, I'm like, if I'm the listener to that, I'm like, oh, what's my follow-up question? I don't know what to say. But if we kind of end it with a little bit of a human connection point, somebody might have a little bit better of an entryway into a conversation. So your goal at that point is to think about how you're going to end your introduction to keep the conversation going.
Right. Awesome.
The other thing I was just going to say too is we tend to think we have to have like a 10-minute long spiel, and you don't. You really just need like 3 to 5 sentences that in any situation you can pull out of your brain and like put into action, and you're going to feel your most confident self.
All right, awesome. So, we met in Vienna, and it was around the Drucker Forum, and particularly a conversation that was around staying human in the midst of AI. And since then, a lot has gone on in the AI world, right? Yeah. How do you feel about its impact on communication, and particularly in the workplace and so on? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's interesting you ask that, because a couple of weeks ago when ChatGPT was like all the rate, you could tell it was going through a PR surge about 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. That's what I told someone as well. I sensed there was a whole PR stand.
Yeah. Like 2 weeks ago, it was like everybody was talking about it. And so you can kind of tell the PR cycle there. But, somebody was like, are you afraid for your job? And I was like, no, because at the end of the day, I think AI, and I think this was our point years ago when we were in Vienna in 2018. So probably 5 years ago?
Exactly.
I think the whole point was that AI is a tool. It will always be a tool. It will always support our communication. And I think it's a really valuable and important tool. I think where it comes into play is that it cannot and it should not replace how we connect with each other. So there are a lot of human interest stories that I know AI can never tell. I know that AI will never be able to talk to a family who is experiencing, a really significant and important change in life. And we need to communicate that story. AI can never really tap into these really distinctly human emotions and connection points. I think it's a tool. And I think the same way as we use Google or we use, Wikipedia or whatever it is, we use it as a tool to supplement how we show up in the world. And I think that's been the power play with a ChatGPT is how do we use it? How do we use it to our advantage and maybe, help I know a lot of people were using it kind of to get honestly rough drafts, get them started.
Yeah.
Because we're all afraid of the blinking cursor on a blank screen. And so I think it's really, I think it's a really good tool to kind of help us warm up our brains and to have a thought partner in that process. But at the end of the day, really encouraging people to get really clear on, how do we continue to humanize that? How does AI interact with human voices too versus one or the other?
Yeah, that's true. Recently wrote, there's an article that was shared where you were talking about tips for interviews so that you sort of align yourself with the interests of the institution you're trying to join. And how do you have any tips like that to share with us in terms of communicating your valuability or how valuable you are to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, obviously, the interview process, whether it's for college, grad school, jobs, the interview process is always a component to really an application process. So in the context of job opportunity, what I always say is that the job interview starts at your first point of communication with that particular firm or that recruiter, that company, whatever it is. And so you have to be really mindful of what your communication looks like from that very first touch point. So whether you're submitting a job application via a portal, whether you're sending it in via LinkedIn, I want you to be really mindful and careful with the way you talk about yourself, grammar, punctuation, just be very professional from the very first point.
Wait, sorry, but before that, there's I think I've observed that there's an increasing change in mode of interacting with people from a very formal, strict formal setting to an informal, to really gauge the kind of person you are looking into hiring. And does that still play into what you're saying?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is, there still needs to be some formality and some professionalism to it. Because I think what you're talking about is really kind of the casual or social nature of communication. And I think you can get there. But I would probably say at the first entry point, keep it pretty professional. Keep it pretty formal. Because, at some companies, you'll be able to tell the culture or the language and how casual you can be. And you're probably going to have to gauge that from some of your initial communication and make that choice in the moment. But when given the choice, always choose, especially for an interview, always choose to be more professional and formal than casual right off the bat.
Right. Okay.
I would probably say too, the interview process is a really important opportunity to showcase your personality, your value, your experience. So I would absolutely be prepared with that elevator pitch that we talked about at the beginning. So name, who you are, what you're studying, what job you're interested in. And then I'd get really clear on how you talk about your education journey or your career journey. So this might take just a couple of minutes before any interview to kind of walk yourself through your path. So maybe you went to school to study a specific topic, you had an internship then during college, and so you gained experience in this particular field, and then you went on to your first job, your second job, and get really clear on how you communicate the path that has led you to this interview. And then obviously, you're more likely than not going to get the questions about, tell me a time when you worked on a group project, or when you communicated something really well or communicated something poorly, or, they're going to try to test you and give you these case study questions. So I'd be prepared for a couple of situations where you did really well and you got a project over the finish line.
And you tell it as a story?
Yeah, I would tell that absolutely. I would tell that as a story. I would set it up very similarly to the way we see stories. So what was the challenge? What was your solution? And then what was the transformation? So think about those 3 points. I'd be prepared for the good stuff, and I'd be prepared to talk about the stuff we'd probably classify as like the good, the bad, and the ugly. So like, what were those situations where you're like, this didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but I learned a lot. I'd be prepared for those situations. And then I always say, they're eventually at the end of the interview, they're going to turn it back to you and they're going to say, what questions do you have for me? So I would always have questions ready. I would maybe tell you.
That's a tricky one too. So what kind of questions are you going to ask? Because you're saying we should stay professional. So,
Yes. So stay professional. It's crazy to think that you go through an interview and you don't have questions. So be thinking about what questions are coming up for you in the course of the interview. So whoever's interviewing you might be telling you a little bit about the job, the day-to-day. Like, don't be afraid to use this opportunity at the end of the interview to ask those questions that might have come up in the moment for you. The second piece that I'm always challenging students to ask is, what does onboarding, training, and development look like?
All right.
Because that is ultimately going to be what sets you up for success. If you ask that question and they're like, well, we walk you through our employee handbook, and then we, let you try it out for a couple, if they seem very casual about it, I'm not saying it's a red flag, but I might use that opportunity to kind of push and ask well, is my manager doing annual reviews with me, monthly reviews? What kind of support or mentoring do I get? Just so that you feel supported in your role. I would always ask about onboarding, training, development. I'd also ask about, what's the career path for somebody like me? What do leadership opportunities look like? What's the potential for me within maybe this team, but also the company? What can I expect for my trajectory of career development? And then my other favorite question that I love to suggest to people is to turn it back on the interviewer and to say, well, tell me a little bit about your career journey within this company. Or what's your day-to-day life look like, or work look like? Or what's been a really positive experience for you within the company culture? To get them talking a little bit. And again, to keep the conversation going, because I think it's going to become easier to continue this conversation if you've been able to show that you're interested in them, you're interested in the company, and you're also interested in where you fit in within all of this.
So you can't ask them how toxic their workspace is.
I wouldn't ask that at this point. I might wait for that one. You might actually, what's interesting is you might actually get a sense for that in their response to the question about the company, you know, like, what's your experience been like? You're going to get some hints from them. Like, if they want to talk about it, they're probably happy. If they don't want to talk about it, there's probably, to my earlier point about communication and like tuning into what is said and unsaid, like, they don't really want to talk about it. There has to be a point of where you're like, I wonder why they don't really want to talk about it. My chances are you're not going to be interviewed by somebody who's miserable at that company. You're probably going to be interviewed by somebody who really likes working there and is happy. So it's just something to keep in mind, though, I also wouldn't ask about like benefits or vacation, or, you know, like, you can't ask about you haven't even been hired yet and you're already asking, you know, when I get to leave. So just think about that. I would ask very big, kind of big picture, higher level questions to keep the conversation going, and to, like, for your own benefit of like, is this a place where I'm going to grow? Are they going to foster my development here? Are they interested in that? I think those are all really good questions to ask at the end of an interview.
So entering the institution, let's assume all this has been fast tracked and you're now in the institution. Given the high reliance on technology for communication, and particularly among millennials, how do you think we can stay human in a workplace, keep our communications very human, and because once you're in, then you're forming relationships, and then you are, like you said, communication is how we stay connected as human beings. So how do you manage to keep that energy going?
Yeah, so my biggest tip when it comes to this, and this actually has come up for me recently, is I would err on the side of over communication versus under communication. So what I mean is that sometimes, and this is a generational thing, for sure, and I think it's something that the younger generations need to start to practice, but I would err on the side of more communication. You know, I would CC people on emails. I would maybe send a meeting agenda the day before. I would think about your role, and I would think about, okay, I anticipate a couple of these communication points, and I'm going to have to be responsible for that communication. So I would always send confirmation emails for upcoming appointments. I would always send meeting agendas. I would always send follow-ups with specific to-dos. Like, I would always think about how you can err on over communication versus under communication. Because I think the problem is we make the assumption that people know what we intend to do or what we're working on. And I would take that off the table and say, I'm going to not assume anything. I'm just going to over communicate. And the thing is once you get comfortable, and once people within your job and your role start to trust you more, you can start to back off of that. But I'd say initially you want to really come full force as a responsible over communicator versus somebody that's hard to be in touch with or in communication with.
Okay, so communicate at all costs. And but what do you think about? You spend most of your time in workplaces these days. Okay, now not as much, maybe because of virtual environments. But what do you think about forming relationships, like human relationships? What do you think about things like office romance? How do those things play into all of this?
Yeah, I think whether you're virtual or in person, it's always helpful to strike up a one-on-one conversation with people. So I would not hesitate to say, hey, can we hop on a Zoom or a phone call? Or if you're in the same, office or the same city, like, hey, can we grab coffee? I would not be hesitant to find those opportunities to have one-on-one conversations with people. And the thing is that they don't have to be hour-long coffees. You can gain a lot of information with a 10 or 15 minute stand up, like, hey, I'm just checking in on you. What are you working on? What are you thinking about? I actually have a client who does that. Her clients can book 15 minutes with her, where they're just like, I just need to hash an idea out. I need a thinking partner for 15 minutes. Can we get that time on the calendar? And so I think there's nothing wrong with reaching out and just asking for 10 or 15 minutes of somebody's time outside of like the company, the virtual meetings with the 50 people in the call, or the company lunches, or, whatever it is that your company does. I would think about what just really short one-on-one communication looks like.
I asked that question because there's a difficulty in expressing ourselves. Something I've realized with a particular, like you're talking about generations, right? In expressing themselves in the workplace. And so I'm just going to pick your mind on some few ways to communicate certain phrases, reword some phrases.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so let's assume I want to tell someone their work is unacceptable. How am I supposed to write that in an email?
All right, so you have to tell somebody their work is unacceptable.
Yeah, but that's harsh, right?
That is pretty harsh. I would try to get into a video or in person, because communicating that in email is rough, right? Like just picture receiving that email. I can only picture the subject line of that. It's probably like feedback or something like scary. I would schedule time to meet with that person. I would maybe ask them to help me understand their process. So like, tell me a little bit about how you started working on this. If they'll probably sense that something's up. So I might just ask a couple questions, like, tell me what your process was. Do you feel like you rushed anything? And then I would probably at that point say, well, here's what works in this piece. So I'd give them some positive, I'd give them some love. And then I would probably at that point say, well, here are the things that I think need to be improved upon.
Right.
Like X, Y, Z. And it's at that point that you can say, like, I don't believe that, this particular part is an acceptable piece of work for our client or our brand. That's when you can lower the boom. But I would try to understand the process first, because if the work is unacceptable because they weren't given, a certain amount of research, or maybe somebody didn't reply to something, like I would try to seek to understand the situation first. And then in that moment, kind of evaluate, like, okay, I think that's legitimate, or that's just an excuse. Like, you're going to be able to like figure it out. But I wouldn't be shy about it. If you're not happy with it, if you want to push them, I would not be shy giving them that feedback. But I'd also give them some strategic moves to fix it, right? Like you don't want to fix it for them, but telling them it's bad and then not giving them a next point, you're going to want to give them something. I'd take a look at this, or here's an example of what I'm looking for. But give them something to kind of support that next stage. If you do that and the next stage is still just as unacceptable, that's an entirely other conversation.
Okay, so what about a superior or supervisor who is being a bit too nosy, and how do you tell them off and say it's none of your business? So how do you rewrite a mail like that?
If I had a boss who was doing that to me, what I would probably do is I would probably say, hey, I feel like you've been asking a lot of questions about this particular project. I'm just curious, like, is there something that I'm not doing that you'd like to see? Like, are you, like, I might put it back. You're not putting it back on them, but I would try to structure it in a way that's like, this is what I'm experiencing. I feel like you've been you've been really interested in my work on this project. I appreciate that, but I'm just trying to understand why.
That's good.
Turn it back to them. I think where your power is in this situation, if you're the person that feels like this, is like, you've got to ask it at a time when like, you're not going to get heated or angry about it. Like, you have to do it at a point where your own frustration, you've let it go a little bit so that you can have a very mature and responsible conversation.
Yeah. So that doesn't come off as angry. Right.
Like, you want to show up as responsible and I'm trying to understand like why you're showing up like this, or what is it that, why are you being nosy or, micromanaging? I think that's probably the thing. Like, I'm just trying to understand why.
Okay, so what about if this is the last scenario? What about if you deeply admire someone's work, and you feel you deeply admire the person or the personality? How are you supposed to go about it? Particularly the person of like the opposite sex, and let's say without it coming off as being, too strong. Yeah, how do you take that?
I mean, I don't think there's any other way to say it, but
in person.
Yes, I would definitely say it in person. I mean, if that's possible, I would say it in person. I think there's, you're not wrong to give anybody that feedback. If you've been impressed by something they've done, I would tell them. And I would say, I just wanted you to know, I really appreciated your work on this. I really like the way you're thinking. I think if you keep it really short and sweet and you're not like gushing over that, I think if you like gush and it's like a very long, like, I think that might be borderline weird. But I think if you keep it pretty short and sweet and you tell them they did great work and here's why, and that's it.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to go off topic. Like this is how we'll end it. Very, very off topic.
I'm ready.
Do you think aliens exist?
I do. I have a hard time believing that they don't. Like, are you telling me that there's no one else out there?
Right. Okay.
You can't tell me that Earth is the only planet where there are people or creatures who live, right? I mean, what do you think?
I'm still divided. I'm still gathering evidence because I've heard about all the school incidents in Zimbabwe and Australia, and it's beginning to add up a bit, but I'm still not sure whether those sightings are necessarily strange creatures. Or whether it's just advanced technology. I'm still on the fence about that. So if there was, let's say, an invasion like that, how will you communicate to me? What would be your way of telling me that, okay, I'm safe or I'm not safe without a phone? Or your loved ones, how are you going to get them to know what's happening with you?
How would I do it?
Yeah, how you communicate that?
I don't even know. How would I? I don't even know. What are the communication tools I have?
You have everything apart from your phone.
Apart from my phone?
Yeah.
And I'm not in person with them. Like, it's not like I have to. No, I'm not in person.
Let's say they're all in Charlotte with you, but at that moment, they are not with you.
And I don't have my phone?
No, you don't have your phone.
I don't know. How do we communicate with people?
Anyway.
I don't know. Do I go to an internet cafe and send a secret email? If I don't have my phone.
Will you go hunting, gathering, and drop a note on the ground?
I don't think I would survive very long. Because I'd have to Google how to hunt and gather, and if I don't have my phone,
No, I'm saying, would you leave a message on the ground? That's what I meant. Would you go as old school as that?
Yeah, I feel like you'd have to leave some kind of breadcrumbs, some kind of paper message to lead back. But that's an interesting question. I hope I'm never in that situation.
Yeah, we hope we're never in that situation. Anyway, it's been so nice having you, Meg. I've enjoyed talking to you and sharing brilliant insights for our listeners.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I will do anything to support you and all that you're up to. And if any of your listeners have questions or comments, please, I hope they feel comfortable reaching out to say hey and to let me know how I can help them.
Yeah, can you drop a contact or something?
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you want me to put it? Do you want me to email it to you, or?
No, you can just say it for those who are listening. Yeah.
So you can always email me. My email is meg@tothshop.com, or I'm on Instagram, Meg Sites, Meg_Sites, or LinkedIn, same name on LinkedIn. Please get in touch. Even I would love to know if you listen to this and what you found helpful or what feedback you have for me.
Awesome. And as always, to wrap up on the Mashup, you can follow us on all our platforms, the Mashup233, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and recently TikTok. So see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.